Maya Singh had always been different from other girls in her village. While they learned to cook and sew, she practiced sword fighting behind the old temple. Her father, Commander Rajesh Singh, trained soldiers for the kingdom's army. He saw the fire in his daughter's eyes and secretly taught her everything he knew about warfare. The year was 1857, and the British East India Company ruled over much of India with an iron fist. Maya's village, Chandrapur, sat on the edge of a vast forest that bordered enemy territory. The villagers lived in constant fear of raids from the neighboring kingdom of Kalinga, whose warriors were known for their cruelty and skill in battle. Maya was 22 years old when the attack came. It was a peaceful morning in spring when the bells started ringing frantically from the watchtower. Black smoke rose from the fields as hundreds of Kalinga warriors on horseback thundered toward the village. Their war cries echoed across the valley like the howls of demons. Commander Singh rushed to gather his men, but they were outnumbered 3-1. The Kalinga forces had planned their attack perfectly, striking when most of the kingdom's main army was away fighting the British. In the north, Maya watched from her window as her father strapped on his armor, his face grim but determined. "Stay inside and keep the doors locked," he told her, placing his weathered hands on her shoulders. "If something happens to me, run to the forest and hide until help comes." But Maya had no intention of hiding. As soon as her father left, she put on her brother's old clothes and grabbed the sword he had given her for her 18th birthday. Her heart pounded as she slipped out the back door and made her way toward the battle. The scene that greeted her was chaos. Houses burned while families ran screaming through the streets. Kalinga warriors chased down fleeing villagers, their curved swords glinting in the sunlight. Maya saw Mrs. Sharma, the baker's wife, fall to her knees as a warrior approached her children. Without thinking, Maya charged forward. Her sword met the warriors with a clash that sent sparks flying. The man was bigger and stronger, but Maya was faster. She ducked under his swing and sliced across his leg, sending him tumbling to the ground. Mrs. Sharma grabbed her children and ran toward the temple where other villagers were taking shelter. Maya fought her way through the burning streets, looking for her father. She found him near the village center, surrounded by 6 Kalinga warriors. His sword arm was bleeding and she could see he was tiring. The enemy commander, a tall man with scars covering his face, watched the fight with cruel amusement. "Surrender now, old man," the commander called out in accented Hindi. "Your village is already lost. Join your people in the temple and we might let them live." Commander Singh spat on the ground. "A Singh never surrenders to dogs like you." The scarred commander's face darkened with rage. He gestured to his men who attacked all at once. Maya watched in horror as her father fought bravely but was overwhelmed by the sheer number of enemies. A sword pierced his side, and he fell to his knees. "Father!" Maya screamed, running toward him. But before she could reach him, strong arms grabbed her from behind. A Kalinga warrior had caught her, his grip like iron around her waist. She struggled and kicked, but more warriors surrounded her. The scarred commander walked over to where her father lay dying. "This must be your daughter," he said, looking at Maya with interest. "She fights well for a village girl, too well." Commander Singh looked up at his daughter, blood trickling from the corner of his mouth. "Maya," he whispered, "remember what I taught you. Honor above all else." Those were his last words. The commander drove his sword through her father's heart, ending his life instantly. Maya screamed in rage and grief, fighting against her captors with renewed strength. But there were too many of them. The commander studied her face carefully. "You have the eyes of a warrior," he said, "but you're just a girl from a defeated village. Still, you might be useful." Maya was thrown into a wooden cage with other captured villagers. As the Kalinga forces prepared to leave with their prisoners and loot, she pressed her face against the bars and looked back at her burning home. The temple where the remaining villagers had hidden was now surrounded by enemy soldiers. She thought she would never see Chandrapur again. The other prisoners wept and prayed, but Maya felt only cold fury burning in her chest. She memorized every face of her captors, especially the scarred commander who had killed her father. The journey to Kalinga territory took 5 days through dense forests and mountain passes. Maya was kept separate from the other prisoners because The commander seemed to find her interesting. He would ride his horse beside her cage and ask her questions about her village's defenses and her father's military tactics. Maya never answered. She stared straight ahead with hatred blazing in her eyes, planning her revenge. The commander seemed amused by her defiance. "You can hate me all you want, girl," he told her on the third day. "But hate won't bring your father back or save your village. You're in my world now." When they finally reached the Kalinga capital, Maya was separated from the other prisoners. The scarred commander, who she learned was named General Vikram, had special plans for her. Instead of being thrown into the slave quarters, she was taken to a small room in the fortress and told she would serve as a personal attendant to the general's household. But Maya knew this was just the beginning. As she sat in her small room, that first night, listening to the sounds of the enemy fortress around her, she made a silent promise to her father's memory. She would not simply survive her captivity. She would find a way to escape, and when she did, she would make sure General Vikram paid for what he had done. The other prisoners thought she was lost forever, just another village girl who had vanished into enemy territory. Her own people had no idea she was alive. But Maya Singh was far from lost. She was planning, learning, and waiting for her chance to strike back at the heart of the enemy kingdom. Maya's new life in the Kalinga fortress was a careful balance between survival and planning. General Vikram had assigned her to work in his personal quarters, thinking that keeping her close would break her spirit. He was wrong. Every morning, Maya served tea to the general and his officers while they discussed military strategies. They spoke freely in front of her, treating her like a piece of furniture. They had no idea she was memorizing every detail about their army's movements, supply lines, and weaknesses. The fortress was massive, built into the side of a mountain with walls 30 feet high. Maya learned that it housed nearly 3,000 soldiers and was considered impregnable. The only way in or out was through the main gate, which was heavily guarded day and night. During her first month, Maya discovered that General Vikram was planning another raid. This time he intended to attack the capital city of her home kingdom, while their army was still fighting the British. The attack would happen during the harvest festival, when the city's defenses would be at their weakest. Maya knew she had to find a way to warn her people, but escape seemed impossible. The fortress was surrounded by thick forest filled with wild animals, and even if she made it past the walls, she had no idea how to find her way home through hundreds of miles of enemy territory. But Maya was patient. She had learned patience from her father, who always said that the best warriors knew when to strike and when to wait. So she waited, watched, and learned everything she could about her captors. She discovered that General Vikram had a weakness for wine from a particular vineyard in the southern provinces. Every evening, he would drink alone in his chambers while studying maps and battle plans. Maya began adding a small amount of sleeping herbs to his wine, herbs she had learned about from the village healer back home. Not enough to make him seriously ill, but just enough to make him sleep more deeply. While he slept, Maya would carefully study his maps and documents, memorizing troop positions and battle strategies. She learned that the Kalinga army was planning a massive campaign that would crush her homeland completely. 3 months into her captivity, Maya made her first real friend in the fortress. His name was Arjun, a young soldier from a village that had been conquered by Kalinga years ago. Like Maya, he had been forced to serve his captors, but unlike her, he had given up hope of ever returning home. Arjun worked in the stables and had access to horses and supplies. Maya began to carefully sound him out, sharing stories of her village and gradually revealing her true identity. When she told him about her father's death, Arjun's eyes filled with tears. "I had a sister," he said, quietly. "She died when our village was burned. Sometimes I dream about going back and making them pay, but it's just a dream." Maya gripped his arm. "Dreams can become reality if you're brave enough to act on them." Slowly, carefully, Maya began to recruit others like Arjun. She found a cook named Priya whose husband had been killed in a raid. She discovered a blacksmith named Kumar who had been forced to make weapons for the army that had destroyed his home. One by one, she gathered a small group of people who had reasons to hate their Kalinga masters. But Maya knew that a handful of angry servants could never defeat 3,000 soldiers. She needed something bigger, something that would cripple the entire Kalinga war machine. That's when she learned about the weapons cache. The fortress contained a massive armory built into the mountain itself. It held thousands of swords, spears, bows, and barrels of gunpowder that the Kalinga had stolen from British supply convoys. General Vikram was extremely proud of this collection and often showed it off to visiting commanders. Maya realized that if she could destroy the armory, she would eliminate most of Kalinga's military advantage in one stroke. But the armory was heavily guarded and protected by thick iron doors. Getting inside would require careful planning and perfect timing. Her opportunity came during the festival of Diwali. Even the Kalinga celebrated the Festival of Lights, though they did so by getting drunk and competing in contests of strength. Maya knew that security would be lighter than usual, and many guards would be distracted by the festivities. She spent weeks preparing for the attempt. Arjun helped her steal oil from the kitchens and lamp wicks from the storage rooms. Priya provided her with information about which guards would be on duty during the festival. Kumar made her a set of lockpicks disguised as hairpins. The night of Diwali, Maya waited until the celebration was in full swing before making her move. She had drugged General Vikram's wine more heavily than usual, ensuring he would sleep until morning. The corridors were dimly lit, and most of the soldiers were either drunk or distracted by games and contests in the courtyard. Maya made her way through the fortress like a ghost, avoiding patrols and staying in the shadows. Her heart pounded as she approached the armory, but her hands were steady. This was what her father had trained her for, even if he had never imagined she would use her skills like this. The lock on the armory door was complex, but Maya had practiced with Kumar's picks for hours. It took her nearly 20 minutes, but finally she heard the satisfying click of the mechanism opening. She slipped inside and closed the door behind her. The armory was even more impressive than she had imagined. Weapons lined the walls from floor to ceiling, and barrels of gunpowder were stacked in neat rows. Maya worked quickly, spreading oil throughout the room and connecting it all with trails of lampwick. She saved the largest container of oil for last, placing it right next to the gunpowder barrels. As she prepared to light the fuse, Maya paused for a moment. Once she did this, there would be no going back. The explosion would be heard for miles, and General Vikram would know immediately that she was responsible. But she thought of her father's dying words and of all the innocent people who would suffer if the Kalinga army continued its campaigns of conquest. Maya lit the fuse and ran. She had calculated that she would have about 2 minutes before the oil reached the gunpowder. She sprinted through the corridors, no longer caring about stealth. Behind her, she could hear the crackling sound of fire spreading along the oil trails. She had just reached the courtyard when the explosion erupted. The entire mountain seemed to shake as thousands of weapons and barrels of gunpowder detonated simultaneously. Windows shattered throughout the fortress, and a pillar of fire and smoke rose into the night sky. Chaos erupted as soldiers ran in all directions, shouting orders and trying to organize firefighting efforts. In the confusion, Maya slipped toward the stables where Arjun was waiting with a fast horse and supplies for her escape. The explosion had given Maya the distraction she needed, but it also made her the most wanted person in the Kalinga kingdom. As she rode through the forest on the horse Arjun had prepared for her, she could hear the sound of pursuit behind her. General Vikram had recovered quickly from his drugged sleep and mobilized search parties within an hour of the blast. Maya pushed her horse hard through the night, following game trails she hoped would keep her hidden from the main search parties. She had studied the maps in Vikram's chambers carefully and knew that reaching her homeland would require crossing 2 major rivers and several mountain passes. The journey would take at least a week, and she would be hunted every step of the way by dawn. Her horse was exhausted, and Maya knew she needed to find shelter. She spotted a small cave hidden behind a waterfall and decided to rest there during the day. As her horse drank from the stream, Maya allowed herself a moment of satisfaction. The explosion had been even more devastating than she had hoped. Not only had she destroyed the weapons cache, but the blast had also collapsed part of the fortress wall and killed dozens of Kalinga soldiers. But her victory was short-lived. As she prepared to sleep, Maya heard voices approaching through the forest. A Kalinga patrol was searching the area, following her tracks. She quickly led her horse deeper into the cave and covered its muzzle to keep it quiet. The soldiers searched for hours, coming dangerously close to her hiding spot several times. Maya heard one of them say that General Vikram had offered a reward of 1,000 gold coins for her capture, dead or alive. She was no longer just the escaped prisoner. She was a major threat to the entire Kalinga war effort. When the patrol finally moved on, Maya realized she could no longer travel the obvious routes. The enemy would expect her to head straight for her homeland. Instead, she would have to take a longer, more dangerous path through the deepest parts of the forest where few humans ever went. For 3 days, Maya traveled through wilderness so thick that sunlight barely penetrated the canopy. Above, she lived on wild berries and stream water, saving the small amount of food Arjun had packed for true emergencies. Her horse stepped on a sharp rock and went lame, forcing her to continue on foot. On the 4th day, Maya encountered something unexpected. She came across a small village that didn't appear on any of General Vikram's maps. The houses were built in trees, connected by rope bridges high above the forest floor. The people who lived there were unlike any she had ever seen, with intricate tattoos covering their arms and faces. At first, the villagers were suspicious of Maya. They spoke a dialect she barely understood and seemed ready to drive her away. But when she showed them the burns on her hands from the explosion and told them in broken phrases about fighting the Kalinga, their attitude changed completely. The village elder, a woman named Kaylee with silver hair and sharp eyes, invited Maya to share their evening meal. Through gestures and the few words they had in common, Maya learned that these forest people had been fighting the Kalinga for generations. They were experts at guerrilla warfare, striking from the treetops and vanishing before the enemy could respond. Kali examined Maya's injuries and treated them with herbal medicines that eased the pain immediately. She also gave Maya new clothes that would help her blend in with the forest, and a curved knife that was perfectly balanced for close combat. But the most valuable thing Kaylee gave Maya was information. She drew a map in the dirt showing secret paths through the mountains that the Kalinga didn't know about. She also told Maya about other villages like theirs, scattered throughout the forest, all of them enemies of the Kalinga kingdom. "You fight well for outsider," Kaylee said in her broken common tongue. "But fighting alone is foolish. Army beats one person every time." Maya understood what the elder was suggesting, but she shook her head. "I must warn my people first. The Kalinga plan to attack during the harvest festival." Kaylee nodded gravely. "Then go quickly. But remember, forest friends help those who help forest." Maya left the tree village before dawn with new supplies and hope in her heart. She wasn't alone in her fight against the Kalinga. There were others who shared her hatred of the enemy, others who might be willing to join a larger rebellion if someone was brave enough to organize it. The secret paths Kaylee had shown her were treacherous but effective. Maya made good time through mountain passes that were little more than cracks in the rock face. She saw no sign of Kalinga patrols for 2 days, but she knew they were still searching for her. On the 7th day of her escape, Maya finally reached the border of her homeland. She stood on a hilltop and looked down at familiar fields and villages. But something was wrong. There was too much smoke rising from too many places. As she got closer, Maya realized with growing horror that the Kalinga had already begun their attack. The harvest festival was still a week away, but General Vikram had moved up his timeline. Maya realized that the destruction of his armory had forced him to strike quickly before word of his weakness could spread. He was using whatever weapons he had left to hit as many targets as possible. Maya pushed herself harder, running through fields she had played in as a child. She reached the outskirts of Chandrapur just as the sun was setting, and was amazed to find it still standing. The village showed signs of hasty fortification, with barricades blocking the main roads and archers positioned on rooftops. She was challenged by sentries as she approached, young men she recognized from her childhood. When they realized who she was, their faces showed shock and disbelief. "Maya Singh? But you're dead." You've been gone for months." Maya didn't have time to explain everything. "Where is Captain Ravi?" she demanded, naming her father's second-in-command. The sentries led her quickly through the village to the temple, which had been converted into a military command post. Captain Ravi, now graying and worn-looking, stared at her as if seeing a ghost. "Maya, thank the gods you're alive, but how did you escape? We heard that all the prisoners were killed." Maya quickly explained about the explosion and her journey through the forest, but she focused most of her attention on the intelligence she had gathered about Kalinga military plans. She spread out everything she had memorized about troop positions, supply lines, and battle strategies. Captain Ravi listened with growing amazement as Maya detailed the enemy's strengths and weaknesses. She knew exactly how many soldiers they had, where they kept their reserves, and most importantly, she knew that the destruction of their main armory had severely limited their ability to wage war. "This information is invaluable," Captain Ravi said. "But Maya, our situation is desperate. The main army is still fighting the British in the north. We have perhaps 200 men to defend the entire region, while the Kalinga still have thousands." Maya smiled grimly. "Not thousands, Captain. And they're not our only enemies anymore." She told him about the forest villages and their hatred of the Kalinga. She explained how years of raids and conquest had created a network of enemies throughout the wilderness, all of them waiting for someone to unite them against their common foe. Captain Ravi's eyes lit up with understanding. "You're talking about raising a rebellion, using the enemy's own cruelty against them." Maya nodded. "General Vikram thinks he's hunting one escaped prisoner. He has no idea that he's about to face an entire army of people he thought he had beaten." Maya's plan was ambitious and dangerous, but Captain Ravi could see it was their only hope. While he organized the defense of Chandrapur and the surrounding villages, Maya would return to the forest to unite the scattered tribes against their common enemy. "You're asking me to let you walk back into enemy territory," Captain Ravi said, shaking his head. "The Kalinga are still hunting for you. If they catch you again, they'll make sure you never escape." Maya's eyes were hard as steel. "Let them try. I know their country better than they know mine now, and I have friends they don't know about." Before leaving, Maya visited her family's house, which had been damaged but not destroyed in the original attack. She knelt beside her father's grave and spoke to him quietly, telling him about her plans for revenge. Then she gathered the few belongings she needed and prepared for the most dangerous mission of her life. The journey back into the forest took 3 days, but Maya moved with confidence now. She knew exactly where she was going and how to avoid the Kalinga patrols that were still searching for her. Her first stop was Kaylee's tree village, where she was welcomed like a returning daughter. Maya spent 2 days with the tree dwellers, learning more about their network of allied villages. She discovered that there were at least 15 different groups scattered throughout the forest, each with their own reasons for hating the Kalinga. Some had been conquered and enslaved, others had seen their sacred places destroyed, and still others had lost family members to Kalinga raids. Kali agreed to send messengers to all the allied villages, calling for a gathering at a hidden valley, deep in the mountains. It would take time for word to spread and for the various tribal leaders to make the journey, but Maya knew that patience was essential. While waiting for the gathering, Maya didn't remain idle. She traveled from village to village, learning about each group's unique skills and resources. The tree dwellers were expert archers and could move through the forest canopy like ghosts. The mountain people were master stoneworkers who could collapse rock walls and create avalanches. The river tribes knew every waterway in the region and could strike from boats before vanishing into the marshes. Each group had been fighting the Kalinga alone, winning small victories but unable to strike decisive blows. Maya realized that their scattered resistance had actually been helping the enemy by allowing them to defeat each group separately. United, these forest warriors could become a force that even General Vikram would have to respect. The gathering finally took place 3 weeks after Maya's return to the forest. Representatives from 12 villages met in a circular clearing surrounded by ancient stone monuments. Maya had never seen so many different types of people in one place. There were tall mountain warriors with braided beards, painted river fighters, with filed teeth and silent jungle hunters who communicated as much with hand signals as with words. At first, the meeting was chaotic. The different groups had old grudges against each other, and several leaders questioned why they should follow a young woman from outside the forest. Maya let them argue for a while, then stood and began to speak. She didn't try to shout over them or demand their attention. Instead, she spoke quietly about her father's death and her months of captivity in the Kalinga fortress. She described the weapons she had destroyed and the intelligence she had gathered. Most importantly, she painted a picture of what would happen if they continued fighting separately. General Vikram has maps of all your territories, she told them. He knows your numbers and your hiding places. He's planning to eliminate you one village at a time, starting with the weakest. By next winter, none of you will be left. The clearing fell silent as the tribal leaders absorbed this information. Maya continued, her voice growing stronger. But he doesn't know that you can work together. He thinks you're just scattered bands of raiders with no real organization. He's wrong, and we can use that against him. Maya spread out a large map she had drawn from memory, showing Kalinga troop positions and supply routes. She explained how coordinated attacks could cripple the enemy's ability to wage war, while making it impossible for them to retaliate effectively. The plan was complex, but elegant. The mountain tribes would block the passes that the Kalinga used to move supplies and reinforcements. The river people would destroy bridges and ambush supply convoys. The forest dwellers would use hit-and-run tactics to keep the enemy forces scattered and confused. And Maya herself would lead a small elite group to capture high-value targets, including General Vikram himself. "You want to capture the general?" asked Torvin, leader of the mountain warriors. "That's impossible. He never travels without a full company of guards." Maya smiled coldly. "He will when he's chasing me. Vikram thinks I'm just one escaped prisoner. Who got lucky? He has no idea what I'm really capable of, and his pride won't let him admit that a village girl has become his greatest threat." The tribal leaders spent 2 days debating Maya's plan, but in the end, they agreed to follow her leadership. She had shown them something they had never seen before, a way to turn their individual strengths into a united force that could actually defeat their enemy. The rebellion began at dawn 3 days later. Maya had timed the attacks to coincide with the Kalinga's renewed offensive against her homeland. While General Vikram was focused on conquering the remaining free villages, his own territory would come under assault from enemies he had thought were already beaten. The mountain passes were the first to fall. Torvin's warriors used their knowledge of the terrain to trigger carefully planned rock slides that buried entire supply convoys. Within hours, the Kalinga found themselves cut off from their main supply bases, unable to move heavy equipment or receive reinforcements. At the same time, the river tribes struck at bridges and ferry crossings throughout the region. Years of Kalinga occupation had taught them exactly which waterways were most critical to enemy operations. They moved like phantoms in their shallow boats, appearing just long enough to destroy a bridge or sink a supply barge before vanishing into the marshes. The forest attacks were the most devastating of all. Small groups of warriors would emerge from the trees, strike hard at Kalinga patrols or outposts, and disappear before reinforcements could arrive. The enemy had no way to predict where the next attack would come from, or how to defend against enemies who could move through terrain they considered impassable. But Maya's own mission was the most dangerous. While the tribal attacks kept General Vikram's forces scattered and confused, she led a hand-picked team of 20 warriors toward the temporary camp where the general was directing his offensive operations. Maya had chosen her team carefully. Half were forest dwellers who could move silently through any terrain. The others were former Kalinga prisoners like herself, people who had intimate knowledge of enemy tactics and equipment. All of them had personal reasons for wanting to see General Vikram captured or killed. The team moved like shadows through the night, using paths that Maya had memorized during her months of captivity. They avoided main roads and known patrol routes, instead following game trails and stream beds that would mask their approach. As they got closer to the enemy camp, Maya felt a familiar cold fury building in her chest. Soon, she would face the man who had killed her father and burned her village. But this time she wouldn't be a helpless prisoner. This time she had an army at her back and years of planning behind her. General Vikram had no idea that his greatest enemy was approaching, or that his entire military campaign was about to collapse around him. General Vikram's camp was a testament to his arrogance. Despite being in hostile territory, he had set up his headquarters in an open valley with minimal fortifications. He believed his reputation for cruelty was protection enough, and that the scattered forest tribes posed no real threat to a disciplined army. Maya and her team observed the camp for 2 full days from concealed positions in the surrounding hills. She counted approximately 300 soldiers, along with dozens of horses and supply wagons. Most importantly, she identified Vikram's personal tent, which sat in the center of the camp and flew his distinctive banner. The general's routine was predictable. Every evening he would meet with his officers to plan the next day's operations. These meetings took place in a large command tent near his personal quarters. Maya realized that if she could capture him during one of these meetings, she would also eliminate most of his senior leadership, but getting into the camp undetected would be nearly impossible. Even with her team's skills, they couldn't fight their way through 300 soldiers. Maya needed a different approach, something that would use Vikram's own expectations against him. The solution came from an unexpected source. On their second night of observation, Maya's team captured a Kalinga messenger who was carrying dispatches from another commander. Under questioning, the messenger revealed that Vikram was expecting reinforcements within the next few days. The reinforcements would arrive at night to avoid detection by enemy scouts. Maya smiled as a plan formed in her mind. She would give General Vikram exactly what he was expecting, but not in the way he anticipated. Maya sent word back to the forest tribes, requesting specific assistance for her mission. Within 24 hours, she had what she needed. Captured Kalinga uniforms, weapons, and equipment from previous raids. Her team would disguise themselves as the expected reinforcements and walk straight into the enemy camp. The plan was incredibly risky. If even one person recognized them as imposters, they would be vastly outnumbered and surrounded. But Maya was counting on the darkness, the chaos of a large military camp at night, and the Kalinga soldiers' assumption that anyone wearing their uniform must belong there. On the appointed night, Maya led her disguised team down from the hills toward the camp. They had arranged themselves to look like a small advance party of the larger reinforcement group. Maya herself wore the armor of a Kalinga captain, complete with the unit insignia she had memorized during her captivity. The sentries at the camp's perimeter challenged them as expected, but Maya responded with the correct passwords and unit designations that the captured messenger had provided. In the darkness, wearing enemy uniforms and speaking with confidence, her team passed the first test. Getting through the camp itself proved more challenging. Several soldiers tried to engage them in conversation, asking about news from their supposed home base. Maya had prepared her team for this, and they gave vague but believable answers about long marches and difficult conditions. The most dangerous moment came when they passed a group of officers near the command area. One of them looked directly at Maya and frowned as if trying to place her face. For a heart-stopping moment, she thought he might recognize her from her time as a prisoner in the fortress. But the officer simply nodded and returned to his conversation. Maya realized that her disguise was better than she had hoped. After months in the forest, she was tanned and lean, very different from the frightened village girl who had been captured so long ago. Maya positioned her team around the command tent while she approached the entrance. 2 guards stood outside, but they barely glanced at her uniform before stepping aside. Inside, she could hear General Vikram's voice discussing plans for the next day's assault on a fortified village. This was the moment Maya had been preparing for since the day her father died. She took a deep breath, drew the curved knife Kaylee had given her, and pushed aside the tent flap. General Vikram was standing over a table covered with maps, pointing out positions to 3 other officers. He looked up as Maya entered, and for a moment their eyes met across the tent. She saw the exact instant when recognition dawned on his scarred face. "You," he whispered, his hand moving toward his sword. But Maya was faster. She had spent months planning this moment, and she moved with the deadly precision her father had taught her. The knife flew from her hand with perfect accuracy, pinning Vikram's sword hand to the table before he could draw his weapon. The other officers tried to react, but Maya's team was already moving. They had entered the tent silently behind her, and within seconds all 3 enemy commanders were disarmed and surrounded. General Vikram stared at Maya in shock and pain, his sword hand pinned to the wooden table. "Impossible," he gasped. "You're just a village girl, a nobody." Maya smiled coldly as she moved around the table toward him. "I was a village girl when you killed my father, but you taught me to be something else. You turned me into your worst nightmare." She pulled the knife from his hand and pressed it against his throat. Outside the tent, she could hear the sounds of her team overpowering the guards. Everything was going according to plan, but the most dangerous part was still ahead. "Kill me then," Vikram snarled, trying to maintain his dignity despite the blood streaming from his wounded hand. "But my army will hunt you down and destroy every village. That helped you?" Maya shook her head. "I'm not going to kill you, General. You're much more valuable to me alive. You're going to help me end this war." She produced rope that she had hidden in her uniform and began tying Vikram's hands behind his back. The other officers were already bound and gagged by her team members. "You think capturing me will stop this war?" Vikram asked through gritted teeth. "My lieutenants will continue the campaign without me." Maya finished securing his bonds and stepped back. "Not when they learn what's really happening to their supply lines and reinforcements. While you've been focused on conquering villages, my allies have been systematically destroying your ability to wage war." As if to emphasize her point, the sound of distant explosions echoed across the valley. Maya's forest allies were hitting another supply depot, following the coordinated plan she had developed during the tribal gathering. Vikram's eyes widened as he began to understand the scope of what was happening. "The forest tribes. You united them against us. Every village you burned, every family you destroyed, every person you enslaved," Maya said quietly. "They all remember. And now they're all working together to make sure you never hurt anyone again." Maya signaled to her team, and they began moving toward the tent entrance. But getting out of the camp alive would be much harder than getting in. Once the guards were discovered, the entire camp would be alerted. The first shouts of alarm came from the direction of the command tent's entrance just as Maya's team emerged with their prisoners. Someone had found the unconscious guards, and within moments the camp erupted into chaos. "Run!" Maya shouted to her team, but running wasn't really an option. They were in the middle of an enemy camp with 300 hostile soldiers between them and safety. Instead, Maya implemented the second part of her plan. She had positioned several of her forest allies in the hills around the camp with signal fires ready to light. As soon as they saw her emerge from the command tent, they would create the impression of a much larger attack force surrounding the camp. The signal fires blazed to life on all sides of the valley, and the night filled with war cries and the sound of horns. To the confused Kalinga soldiers, it looked like they were being attacked by a massive army. Panic spread through the camp as officers tried to organize defenses against enemies they couldn't see. Maya used the confusion to her advantage, leading her team and prisoners toward the camp's edge. Her disguised warriors moved with purpose while the real Kalinga soldiers ran in all directions, unsure of what was happening or where the attack was coming from. They almost made it out clean. Maya was within 50 yards of the camp perimeter when a Kalinga officer finally managed to organize a coherent response. He had recognized that the attack was mostly illusion and was rallying soldiers to block the escape routes. "There!" the officer shouted, pointing at Maya's group. "The prisoners, don't let them escape." A group of 20 soldiers charged toward them, cutting off their path to freedom. Maya found herself trapped between the organized pursuit and the camp's defensive perimeter. General Vikram, despite his bonds, began shouting orders to his men. "Kill them all. I don't care about prisoners, just kill them." Maya realized that her original escape plan wouldn't work. She needed something dramatic, something that would scatter the enemy soldiers and give her team the opening they needed. She grabbed General Vikram and pressed her knife to his throat. "Listen carefully," she called out to the charging soldiers. "Your general lives or dies based on your next decision. Clear a path to the camp entrance, or watch your beloved leader bleed out in the dirt." The soldiers hesitated, unwilling to risk their commander's life, but also afraid to disobey his orders. Maya used their confusion to continue moving toward the perimeter, dragging Vikram with her while her team protected the flanks. "You won't kill me," Vikram said confidently. "You need me alive for your plan to work." Maya's voice was ice cold when she replied, "I need you alive, but I don't need you uninjured. Keep testing me and find out exactly how much pain you can survive." To emphasize her point, she pressed the knife deeper against his throat, drawing a thin line of blood. Vikram fell silent, finally understanding that this was not the same frightened girl he had captured months ago. Maya's team reached the camp perimeter just as more organized pursuit began forming behind them. The signal fires in the hills were still burning and the sounds of fake attacks continued from all directions. But Maya knew the deception wouldn't last much longer. "Into the forest," she commanded, and her team plunged into the thick woods that surrounded the valley. Behind them, General Vikram's army was in complete disarray. Their commander had been captured, their camp was under apparent attack from multiple directions, and their supply lines were being systematically destroyed. For the first time in years, the mighty Kalinga war machine was truly vulnerable. As Maya led her prisoners deeper into the forest, she allowed herself a moment of satisfaction. The first phase of her revenge was complete, but the real work was just beginning. 3 days after the capture, Maya stood at the edge of her home village with General Vikram bound in chains beside her. The sight that greeted them was not what she had expected when she first planned her revenge. Word of Vikram's capture had spread faster than wildfire through both kingdoms. The Kalinga forces, leaderless and demoralized, had begun retreating from their forward positions. But more importantly, the news had reached the main army of Maya's homeland, which was finally returning from their campaign against the British. Captain Ravi approached Maya with a mixture of pride and amazement on his weathered face. Behind him walked a man Maya recognized from her father's stories but had never met, General Ashwin Sharma, the supreme commander of their kingdom's forces. "Maya Singh," General Sharma said, his voice filled with respect. "Your father would be proud of what you have accomplished. In 6 months you have done what our entire army could not do in years of warfare." Maya looked at the general with tired eyes. The months of planning, fighting, and constant danger had taken their toll on her. "I did what needed to be done, sir. Nothing more." General Sharma studied the chained figure of General Vikram, who stood silently beside Maya. The once proud Kalinga commander had said little during the journey to Chandrapur, but his eyes still burned with hatred and the desire for revenge. "What do you intend to do with him?" General Sharma asked. Maya had been thinking about this question for days. Her first instinct had been simple revenge, to make Vikram pay for her father's death and the destruction of her village. But during the long journey home, she had begun to see a larger opportunity. "I want to end this war permanently," Maya said. "Not just win a battle or capture territory, but create a peace that will last for generations." She gestured toward the horizon where smoke still rose from distant villages that had been damaged in the fighting. "Look at what this conflict has cost both sides. Thousands of dead, entire regions devastated, families destroyed. If we just execute General Vikram, his people will eventually find a new leader and the cycle of violence will continue." General Sharma nodded thoughtfully. "What do you propose?" Maya turned to face General Vikram directly. Despite his chains, he maintained the bearing of a proud warrior. She had to admit that she respected his refusal to beg or show weakness even in defeat. "General Vikram," she said formally, "you have seen what united opposition can accomplish. Your supply lines are destroyed, your fortress is damaged, and your army is scattered. You know that continuing this war will only lead to more suffering. For your people." Vikram met her gaze steadily. "What are you offering?" Maya had spent days working out the details of her proposal with Captain Ravi and the tribal leaders. It was ambitious, perhaps impossibly so, but she believed it was their only hope for lasting peace. "A treaty," she said. "Not just a temporary ceasefire, but a permanent agreement that addresses the causes of this conflict. Trade agreements that give your people access to resources they need without taking them by force. Border arrangements that protect both kingdoms, and most importantly, a formal alliance against our common enemies. General Sharma looked surprised. Alliance? With the Kalinga? Maya nodded. The British are still a threat to both our kingdoms. They play us against each other while they grow stronger. United, we could drive them out completely and secure our independence. General Vikram was silent for a long moment, considering her words. Finally, he spoke. And if I agree to negotiate such a treaty, what happens to me? You return to your people as a leader who chose wisdom over pride, Maya replied. You help build the peace instead of prolonging the war. The negotiations that followed took place in the temple, where Maya had first learned of her father's death. Representatives from both kingdoms, as well as delegates from the forest tribes, gathered to work out the complex details of the proposed treaty. General Vikram proved to be as skilled a diplomat as he was a warrior. Despite being a prisoner, he negotiated fiercely for his people's interests. Maya found herself developing a grudging respect for the man who had killed her father. The treaty that emerged was unprecedented in the region's history. It established formal borders between the kingdoms, created trading relationships that would benefit both sides, and included provisions for the forest tribes to maintain their independence, while serving as a buffer zone between the larger powers. Most importantly, it created a military alliance specifically aimed at expelling British influence from the region. Both kingdoms would contribute troops and resources to a unified command that would coordinate resistance efforts. The signing ceremony took place exactly 1 year after General Vikram had first attacked Chandrapur. Maya stood beside the treaty table watching as the man who had been her greatest enemy signed the document that would make him her ally. As Vikram finished signing, he looked up at Maya. You have surprised me at every turn, he said quietly. I captured a village girl and somehow created my most dangerous enemy. Now that enemy has become the architect of peace between our peoples. Maya felt tears welling in her eyes as she thought of her father. My father taught me that honor was the most important thing a warrior could possess. I think he would approve of choosing honor over revenge. The celebrations that followed the treaty signing lasted for 3 days. Representatives from dozens of villages and tribal communities came to witness the historic agreement. Even some of the forest people who rarely interacted with outsiders made the journey to see the peace that Maya had helped create. But for Maya herself, the most meaningful moment came when she visited her father's grave after the ceremony. She knelt beside the simple stone marker and spoke to him quietly about everything that had happened. I kept my promise, Father, she whispered. I brought honor to our family name. But I also found something you taught me that I didn't understand before. Sometimes the greatest victory is knowing when to stop fighting. As she rose to leave the graveyard, Maya found General Vikram waiting for her by the gate. He had removed his chains and was dressed in the formal uniform of a Kalinga diplomat rather than a warrior. I wanted to thank you, he said simply. Not just for sparing my life, but for showing me a different path forward. Maya studied his face, looking for signs of deception or hidden anger. But all she saw was genuine respect, and perhaps the beginning of friendship. The real test will be making this peace work, she replied. Treaties are just words on paper unless people choose to honor them. Vikram nodded. Then we must both work to ensure that choice is made every day. 6 months later, Maya stood on the walls of the rebuilt Kalinga fortress, now serving as a joint command center for the Allied armies. Below her, soldiers from both kingdoms trained together, preparing for the campaign that would drive the British forces from the region completely. General Vikram approached and stood beside her, looking out over the training grounds. Your forest friends have adapted well to working with regular troops, he observed. Maya smiled. They're natural soldiers. They just needed someone to help them see the bigger picture. The campaign against the British proved to be a complete success. The unified armies, supported by the forest tribes' guerrilla tactics, drove the colonial forces out of 3 major strongholds within 2 months. The British, faced with determined resistance and deprived of their strategy of playing local kingdoms against each other, decided that the region was no longer worth the cost of occupation. Maya's name became legendary throughout both kingdoms. Songs were written about the village girl who had turned the tide of war through courage, intelligence, and ultimately wisdom. But she never sought political power or military rank for herself. Instead, Maya became something more valuable than a general or a queen. She became the living symbol of what was possible when enemies chose to become allies. Her story proved that even the deepest hatred could be transformed into lasting peace through courage, honor, and the willingness to see beyond the cycle of revenge. When visitors asked her about her greatest achievement, Maya would always give the same answer. I kept the promise I made to my father. I brought honor to our family name. But I also learned that the greatest honor comes not from defeating your enemies, but from turning them into friends.